The folder on the desk has Joe Moser's name on it. A Gestapo officer opens it and stamps 4 letters across the top. DIKAL. In German it stands for Darf in kein anderes Lager. Allowed in no other camp. 4 letters that mean one thing. This man is not a prisoner of war. He is scheduled for execution. Joe Moser is a 22-year-old farm boy from Ferndale, Washington. He flew 43 combat missions without a scratch. He had his bags half packed for the ride home, and now he is sitting in a Nazi concentration camp with a death sentence stamped on his file, wondering how a single afternoon over France brought him here. Joseph Frank Moser is born on September 3, 1921, in Ferndale, Washington, a small farming town in Whatcom County, not far from the Canadian border. His family works the land, cows, wheat, the kind of work that starts before sunrise and ends after dark. Joe is a quiet kid, polite, hardworking, the kind of boy who does what he is told and does not complain. His neighbors like him. His teachers like him. Nobody in Ferndale thinks twice about Joe Moser. He is just another farm boy in a small town at the edge of the continent. Then Joe sees a P-38 Lightning for the first time. The plane has 2 engines and 2 fuselage booms, and a central cockpit pod mounted between them. The Germans call it the fork-tailed devil. Joe calls it the most beautiful thing he has ever seen. He is 18 years old. He decides immediately that he is going to fly that plane. Not some other plane. That plane. He does not know yet how rare that dream will become, or what it will cost him. But the decision is made in an instant, and Joe Moser is not the kind of man who changes his mind. Joe enters the Army Air Corps as soon as he is eligible. He goes through primary training, then basic training, then advanced training. He earns his wings. He is assigned to the 474th Fighter Group, 429th Fighter Squadron, 9th Air Force. He gets his P-38 Lightning. His service number is 0755999. He is based at an advanced landing ground called A-11 at Saint-Lambert in Normandy, France. He has arrived just after D-Day. The Allies are fighting to break out of the Normandy beachhead. Every plane, every pilot, every mission matters. Joe Moser is exactly where he wanted to be. His missions are dangerous from the start. The German anti-aircraft network over France is dense and accurate. Low-altitude strafing runs, which are Joe's specialty, require flying straight at a target at treetop level, while every gun in the area tries to kill you. Joe does it mission after mission. He learns the rhythms of the sky over France. He learns how to read flak bursts and adjust his approach angle. He learns how to stay calm when the plane is shaking from near misses. Missions 1 through 10 pass without incident. Then 20, then 30, then 40. Each one adds another mark in the log. Each one brings him one step closer to going home. After Mission 44. By August 1944, the Allied breakout from Normandy has succeeded. The German army in France is retreating east in chaos. American ground forces are pushing fast. The job of the P-38 pilots is to hunt the retreating Germans on every road, every bridge, every railway line they can find and destroy them before they can regroup. The missions are almost constant. Joe flies them all. By August 13th, he has 43 completed missions in his log. He is close enough to the end of his tour that he can feel it. That morning, Joe climbs into his P-38 Lightning. The aircraft serial number is 43-28378. He is leading the second element of the squadron on a dive bombing and strafing operation near Dreux, in the Eure-et-Loir department of France, roughly 80 kilometers southwest of Paris. The target is anything that moves. German vehicles, supply trucks, troop columns, fuel convoys. Whatever is on the road belongs to the squadron. Joe spots a truck convoy and pushes the P-38's nose down. He lines up on the trucks and begins his strafing run. He never sees the flak truck hidden in the convoy. It is armed with 20mm and 37mm cannons. The moment Joe's P-38 comes into range, it opens fire. The shells tear into his aircraft at point-blank range. His left engine explodes. The plane yaws hard left. Joe has seconds to react. He pulls the canopy release and bails out at low altitude with one engine on fire, and the ground coming up fast. The parachute opens. He hits the ground hard in a field near a small cluster of buildings called Les Gatines du Lin, roughly 17.5 kilometers northeast of Dreux. He is on the ground for less than 10 minutes. German soldiers from the convoy are already running across the field toward him. Joe has no weapon, no cover, and nowhere to go. He is taken prisoner immediately. He is 22 years old. Mission 43 is done. Mission 44 is over. But Joe Moser's real ordeal is just beginning. The Germans take Joe to a nearby village and hand him to an SS commander who interrogates him briefly. Joe gives his name, rank, and service number. Nothing else. The next day, he is transferred to the Gestapo in Paris. This is the first sign that something is wrong. Normal procedure for a captured Allied airman is to be taken to a Luftwaffe interrogation center, processed as a prisoner of war, and sent to a standard prisoner of war camp. The Gestapo has no role in handling military prisoners, but Joe is not going to a Luftwaffe facility. He is going to the Gestapo. From Paris, Joe is transported to Fraynes prison, located on the southern outskirts of the city. Fraynes is not a prisoner of war camp. It is a political prison. Its cells have held French resistance members, Jewish civilians, SOE agents, and anyone else the Gestapo considers an enemy of the Reich. The walls of those cells are covered with inscriptions scratched by desperate men and women waiting for execution. Joe is placed in a solitary cell. He sits alone in a stone room and waits. He does not know why he is here instead of a prisoner of war camp. He does not know what the Gestapo intends to do with him. What Joe does not yet know is that he is not alone in this situation. Scattered across Fraynes prison and other Gestapo holding facilities in and around Paris are dozens of other Allied airmen. They have been arriving for weeks. Some were shot down and captured in civilian clothes while trying to evade through the French countryside. Some were betrayed to the Gestapo by an infiltrator named Jacques Desoubry, a French Nazi agent who had penetrated the Comet and Pat escape lines and was systematically selling downed Allied airmen to the Germans. Desoubry alone was responsible for betraying a significant number of these men. They are now classified by the Germans not as prisoners of war, but as terror fliegers, terror flyers. Let us know in the comments where you are watching this from. Are you in the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, or somewhere else? We would love to know who is keeping these stories alive, because what happens next is something the Gestapo intended to keep secret forever. Allied airmen were about to be sent somewhere no Allied airman was supposed to go. And almost nobody on the Allied side had any idea. August 15, 1944. The Allies are closing in on Paris. American forces are racing north and east. The liberation of the French capital is days away. Inside Fraynes prison, the Gestapo is making decisions quickly. They cannot let their prisoners fall into Allied hands. Executions begin. Gestapo officers move through the cells, reducing the prison population by the most direct method available. But there are too many prisoners, and not enough time. A different solution is decided. The remaining prisoners will be evacuated east into Germany, where the Allies cannot reach them. Joe Moser and approximately 167 other Allied airmen are loaded onto a train. It is the last train that will leave Paris before the Allies enter the city. The men are packed into cattle boxcars. There is almost no room to move. The August heat inside the sealed boxcars is suffocating. No water is provided, no food. The doors are locked from the outside. Joe and the men around him have no idea where they are heading. They do not know if they are going to a prisoner of war camp, a labor camp, or a field somewhere east of Paris where the Gestapo intends to shoot them all. The train moves east through the French countryside while the sound of Allied artillery grows louder, then fainter, then disappears entirely behind them. The journey takes 5 days. 5 days in sealed boxcars in August heat. Men collapse from dehydration. Some manage to pry loose a floorboard and take turns getting fresh air through the gap. When the train finally stops and the doors are unlocked, the men stumble out onto a railway platform and look around. The signs on the platform are in German. The air smells of smoke and something else. Something chemical and acrid. Something none of the men can immediately identify. They are marched through gates topped with barbed wire. They are marched past watchtowers and fences and rows of identical barracks. Joe Moser looks around and realizes where he is. This is not a prisoner of war camp. This is Buchenwald, a Nazi concentration camp. Buchenwald concentration camp sits on the Ettersberg Hill just north of Weimar in central Germany. It was established in 1937. By August 1944, it holds approximately 60,000 inmates, Russian prisoners of war, political prisoners, common criminals, Jewish civilians from across occupied Europe, religious prisoners, men and women from Germany, France, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and a dozen other countries. Many of them are barely alive. The camp runs on forced labor. The weak and sick die in the camp hospital or are simply killed to make room for new arrivals. Joe Moser and the other 167 Allied airmen walk through the gate on August 20, 1944. The processing is humiliating and methodical. The airmen are stripped and completely shaved. Every hair on their bodies is removed. Their uniforms and personal belongings are taken. They are given prison clothes that are thin and inadequate for the coming autumn. Then they are marched to what is called the Little Camp, a sub-camp on the edge of the main compound. In the Little Camp, there are no barracks. There are only tents, and in August the tents are already overcrowded. Joe and the other airmen are told to sleep outside, on the ground, without shelter. This is not a mistake or an oversight. It is policy. Each airman is assigned a Buchenwald prisoner number. Joe's number is 78369. The number is not tattooed but is recorded in the camp files. His file is also stamped with the acronym DIKAL, the 4 German letters that have appeared on so many of these men's files. Darf in kein anderes Lager. Allowed in no other camp. The men learn what this means quickly, from other prisoners who have been at Buchenwald longer. It means the camp authorities have orders not to transfer these men to any prisoner of war facility. It means they are to stay at Buchenwald until the camp is done with them. And when Buchenwald is done with a prisoner, there is only one outcome. If you are enjoying this story and want more untold accounts from World War II prisoners of war, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We are bringing you stories that most history books never covered. Now let us go inside Buchenwald and talk about how 168 Allied airmen tried to survive a place that was never meant for survivors. Chapter: The KLB Club. The 168 Allied airmen represent 6 nationalities: 82 Americans, 48 British, 26 Canadians, 9 Australians, 2 New Zealanders, and 1 Jamaican. Among them are experienced combat veterans who have survived aerial combat, crash landings, parachute jumps, and months in hiding with the French resistance. They are not civilian prisoners. They are trained military men, and in the middle of Buchenwald, that training begins to matter. The senior Allied officer among them is Squadron Leader Philip Lamison, a New Zealander flying for the Royal Air Force. Lamison takes charge immediately. He organizes the men into a coherent unit. He insists on maintaining military order and discipline. Formal meetings are held. Representatives from each national group are elected. A code of conduct is established. The men decide together that they will behave as military officers, not as concentration camp inmates. It is an act of collective defiance that keeps many of them sane in the weeks that follow. They give themselves a name: the KLB Club. From the German words Konzentrationslager Buchenwald, concentration camp Buchenwald. The name is dark and self-aware and exactly the kind of gallows humor that keeps soldiers functional in impossible situations. One of the Canadian airmen, William Arthur Waldron, writes a poem about the experience called A Reflection. The winning design for a club pin, submitted by a British airman named Bob Taylor, shows a naked winged foot chained to a ball bearing the letters KLB, mounted on a white Allied star. The pin will be produced after the war and worn by survivors at reunions for decades. Joe Moser is not an elected officer or a vocal leader. He is the same quiet farm boy from Ferndale that he has always been. He watches, he listens, he follows Lamison's direction. He does what he is told and he does not complain. But inside, he is counting every day. He knows the Allied lines are somewhere to the west. He knows Paris has been liberated. He can see the direction the war is going. The question is whether the war will end before Buchenwald ends him. The conditions in the little camp are deliberately designed to destroy a person's physical and psychological health as quickly as possible. The airmen sleep on the ground without shelter in late August and early September. The days are still warm, but the nights are starting to cool. They receive minimal food, a thin, watery soup and a small portion of bread. The calorie count is far below what an adult male needs to survive, let alone someone who was flying combat missions weeks before. The men begin to lose weight rapidly. Joe Moser, already lean from months of operational flying, watches his body hollowing out. The roll calls are an additional torment. Appels, the Germans call them. Twice a day, sometimes more, all prisoners are ordered to stand in formation while guards count and recount every head in the camp. The appels can last for hours. The men stand in the heat or the rain or the gathering autumn cold while the guards take their time. If the count does not come out right, the entire process starts over. Men collapse during the long-standing appels. Sick men are forced to stand anyway. There is no mercy in the process. The point is exhaustion. In late August 1944, Allied aircraft bomb the armaments factory adjacent to the Buchenwald camp. The explosions are massive. Buildings collapse. Fire spreads across the factory complex. Hundreds of SS guards and German civilian workers are killed in the attack. And while the bombs fall, the SS guards refuse to allow any Buchenwald prisoners working in the factory to take cover. The prisoners from the factory labor detail stand in the open while bombs fall around them. After the raid, the 168 Allied airmen are standing in the open with nowhere to go. They crouch down. They survive. But around them, the carnage from the bombing is extensive. After the raid, Lamison takes stock of his men. The 168 are still together, hungry, weakened, frightened, but alive. September turns to October. The airmen have been at Buchenwald for more than a month. The DIKL stamp on their files has not changed. They are still classified as Terrorfliegers. They are still scheduled to remain at Buchenwald indefinitely. 2 of the 168 have already died. British airman Philip Hemmens dies on October 18th from septic anemia, rheumatic fever, and pneumonia. He is one of the youngest in the group. American airman Levitt Beck will die weeks later from purulent pleurisy. The disease that is killing Beck and Hemmens is the same disease circling every man in the group. They are all malnourished, sleeping outside, and breathing the air of a camp that is rife with typhus, tuberculosis, and dysentery. Squadron leader Lamison knows that every week they remain at Buchenwald is a week closer to either disease or execution. He makes contact with other prisoner groups in the camp and gets a message out to the senior Luftwaffe officer he can reach. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, operates its own prisoner of war camps separately from the SS-run concentration camps. Lamison argues that he and his men are uniformed military airmen and entitled to prisoner of war status under the Geneva Convention. The Luftwaffe should be responsible for them, not the SS and the Gestapo. It is a legal argument being made in a place where law does not exist. But Lamison makes it anyway, because it is the only card he has left to play. In late September, after the Allied bombing of the armaments factory next to the camp, Luftwaffe officers arrive at Buchenwald to assess the damage. Some accounts suggest that a senior Luftwaffe officer named Hannes Trautloft is among them. According to the airmen's testimonies, these officers see the 168 Allied airmen in their condition, in a concentration camp, wearing prison clothes and starving. Whether Trautloft or the other officers directly intervene, or whether their visit simply sets events in motion through other channels is not certain. The Buchenwald Memorial Authority has acknowledged that such a visit may have happened and may have influenced the decision-making process. What is certain is that something changes in October 1944. Let us stop here and understand what these men represented in numbers. 168 Allied airmen in total, 82 Americans, 48 British, 26 Canadians, 9 Australians, 2 New Zealanders, 1 Jamaican. They arrived at Buchenwald on August 20th, 1944. They had been at Buchenwald for 60 days when they were finally moved. In those 60 days, the average man in the group lost a significant fraction of his body weight. Joe Moser, who was not a large man to begin with, will weigh 113 pounds when he finally reaches Stalag Luft 3. A grown man who had been flying combat missions weeks before, now weighing 113 pounds. That is what 60 days in the little camp at Buchenwald does to a human body. Of the 168 men, 2 died at Buchenwald from illness before they could be moved. 156 were transferred out on the night of October 19th. The remaining 10 were moved in small groups over the following weeks. The death sentence stamped on their files was never formally rescinded. The DIKAL order was never officially cancelled. The Gestapo's intention to execute these men as terrorfliegers remained the official policy until circumstances made it impossible to carry out. 4 days separated these men from scheduled extermination. Not a legal ruling, not a change of heart by the regime. 4 days. The traitor who sent most of them there, Jacques Desoubris, a French collaborator who infiltrated Allied escape networks and sold downed airmen to the Gestapo, was captured after the war. He was tried in France for his crimes. He was executed in 1949. The men he sent to Buchenwald did not attend the execution. Most of them were trying to forget that any of it had happened. On the night of October 19, 1944, 156 of the 168 Allied airmen are ordered to collect their belongings and assemble at the camp gate. They do not know where they are going. It could be a different concentration camp, it could be an execution site. They assemble anyway because they have no choice. Trucks take them to a railway station. The cars waiting for them are actual passenger rail cars, not cattle box cars. It is the first sign that something has changed. They are loaded onto the train and it moves east into the German night. After roughly 20 hours, the train stops at a railway station in Silesia, in what is now Poland. The men are marched through a forest to a large compound surrounded by fences and watchtowers. The signs identify it as Stalag Luft III, Sagan. Stalag Luft III is the German Air Force's most secure and most famous prisoner of war camp. It is run by the Luftwaffe, not the SS. The food is better than Buchenwald. There is shelter. There are actual beds. The men are treated according to the Geneva Convention. For men who came from Buchenwald, it feels almost incomprehensible. Joe Moser is assigned to a barracks in the compound. He walks in, finds his bunk, and sits down. Then his new bunkmates begin pointing things out to him. Look at the floor here. See these boards? And here, behind this stove. Look at this tunnel entrance. Joe looks and begins to understand. He has been assigned to the very barracks where the Great Escape happened. On the night of March 24th to 25th, 1944, 76 Allied prisoners of war tunneled out of this compound in the largest escape attempt in the history of Stalag Luft III. The escape happened roughly 1 month before Joe was even shot down. Of the 76 who escaped, only 3 made it to freedom. 50 were executed on Hitler's direct orders. The tunnels are sealed now, but the barracks are the same. The floorboards are the same. Joe Moser, who survived Buchenwald, is sleeping in the beds of men who were shot trying to be free. Joe spends several months at Stalag Luft III. He weighs 113 pounds when he arrives. He slowly gains strength on better food and regular shelter. He makes friendships with other prisoners. He waits. Outside the wire, the war is collapsing toward its end. On the Eastern Front, Soviet forces are advancing faster than German commanders expected. By late January 1945, Soviet troops are only 26 kilometers from Stalag Luft III. On the night of January 27, 1945, at approximately 10 in the evening, German guards wake all the prisoners. They have 30 minutes to pack everything they can carry and assemble outside. The camp is being evacuated on foot, in the middle of a Silesian winter, in the dark. Joe Moser and thousands of other Allied prisoners of war are marched west into the snow. The temperature is well below freezing. Men who cannot keep up are left at the roadside. Some die from exposure. Others are shot by guards who have no patience for stragglers. The march goes on for days. Eventually, Joe and the men with him are loaded onto railway cars and taken to Stalag 7A at Moosburg in Bavaria, roughly 40 kilometers northeast of Munich. Moosburg becomes one of the most crowded prisoner of war camps in Germany as more and more Allied prisoners are funneled in from camps across the eastern zones. Conditions are difficult. Food is scarce. Men are crammed into every available space. But Joe Moser is still alive. After Buchenwald, every day alive is something he does not take for granted. On April 29, 1945, American armor from General George Patton's Third Army arrives at Moosburg. The gates of Stalag 7A are broken open. Joe Moser walks out of the last prisoner of war camp he will ever see in the spring sunshine of Bavaria. He has been a prisoner for 8.5 months. He has survived a concentration camp, a prisoner of war camp, a death march, and a second prisoner of war camp. He has weighed as little as 113 pounds. He has watched men die next to him from disease and violence and exposure. He is 23 years old. He returns to Ferndale, Washington. He marries his wife, Jean. He goes to work repairing furnaces. He becomes the quiet, polite neighbor that people have always known him to be. He does not talk about the war. His neighbors know nothing about Buchenwald. They know nothing about the DIKL, stamp or the death sentence or the 60 days sleeping on the ground in a concentration camp while his file waited in a Gestapo office. Joe Moser repairs furnaces and exchanges pleasantries and keeps the whole story locked inside. For decades. The silence is not unusual. Many of the 168 men who survived Buchenwald come home and say nothing. There is a particular reason for this silence that goes beyond ordinary war trauma. The Allied military had classified the entire incident. The British and American governments did not want it publicly known that their airmen had been held in a Nazi concentration camp. It raised too many difficult questions. Why had the Gestapo been allowed to handle Allied prisoners of war? Why had it taken so long to get the men out? Why were only 2 of the 168 deaths? The official answer was that it was better not to discuss it. Veterans who tried to talk about Buchenwald were told to keep quiet. Some were directly ordered not to speak of it, so they did not. Decades pass. Jean and Joe grow old together in Ferndale. The war recedes further and further into history. Then, slowly, things begin to change. Other survivors of the KLB Club begin talking. Books are written. A documentary film is made. The story of the 168 Allied airmen at Buchenwald begins to enter the public record. Joe watches all of this from Ferndale and eventually decides that he too has something to say. He begins working with a writer named Gerald Barron. Together they produce a book called A Fighter Pilot in Buchenwald. Joe is in his late 80s when the book comes out. He begins giving talks at schools and veterans organizations. A local elementary school teacher named Leanne Laney invites him to speak to her 5th graders almost every year. He sits in front of small children in Ferndale, Washington, and tells them what it was like to bail out over France at age 22 and end up in a Nazi concentration camp. The children sit in complete silence. In 2009, Joe Moser receives the Distinguished Flying Cross. The medal should have been presented 6 decades earlier. The ceremony takes place at McChord Air Force Base in Washington State. Military honors are rendered. Joe stands in his civilian suit in front of a crowd of family members and Air Force personnel and accepts the medal that the Army Air Corps never got around to giving him after the war. He is 87 years old. He thanks everyone quietly. Then he goes home to Ferndale. On December 2, 2015, Joseph Frank Moser dies in Ferndale, Washington. He is 94 years old. An Air Force Honor Guard from Joint Base Lewis McChord renders full military honors at his funeral. More than 500 family members and friends attend. The last surviving member of the KLB Club, a British airman named Stanley Booker, dies in January 2025. With his death, the last living witness to Buchenwald's most closely guarded secret is gone. Chapter. What the 4 letters mean. There is one detail from Joe Moser's story that stays. 4 letters. DIKAL, stamped on a folder in a Gestapo office in Paris in the summer of 1944. Allowed in no other camp. It is a bureaucratic sentence. A stamp. The kind of clerical act that does not feel like a death warrant until you understand what it means in the context of where it was stamped. In Buchenwald, in 1944. On the files of Allied military airmen who were entitled by international law to be treated as prisoners of war. The Gestapo looked at those entitlements and stamped 4 letters over them anyway. Joe Moser flew 43 missions against the enemy without a scratch. He was one of the most proficient P-38 pilots in the 9th Air Force, a man who knew how to read a sky and survive inside it. On his 44th mission, a flak truck he never saw put a 20mm shell into his engine, and gravity did the rest. In 10 minutes, he went from a fighter pilot making a strafing run over France to a prisoner in German hands. In 5 days, he was in Fresnes prison. In 2 weeks, he was at Buchenwald. In 60 days, he was skin and bone on a cattle car heading east with a death sentence in a folder. The Gestapo intended for this to be a secret. 168 Allied airmen sent to a concentration camp as terrorfliegers, quietly executed, never spoken of. 4 days separated them from exactly that outcome. 4 days. What intervened is still not fully certain. Lamesson's persistence. A Luftwaffe officer who may have seen the men and passed word to someone who mattered. A bureaucratic process that moved slower than the SS wanted. Whatever it was not mercy. Mercy would have released them months earlier. It was circumstance. The kind of circumstance that Joe Moser understood better than most. Because he spent his whole life knowing that on August 13, 1944, he flew one mission too many. And somehow, impossibly, came home from it anyway.